Amen. Look, this is every week we say the same thing. This is not a game. You know? This is not a game. This is life and death. Not just in this life, but in real life, the life to come. This is life and death. And we don't get to decide whether we like the way he's doing it or how he's chosen to do it. It just is what it is. He has chosen to work through structure, through authority, through leaders. We see it over and over again in Scripture. I mean, what did Yeshua do? Yeshua came as a leader who then discipled a bunch of leaders and sent them out to go make more leaders through a discipling process, not just an information process. So just because you received information doesn't make you a disciple and doesn't make you qualified to go out there and lead anybody else. There was a training process. His disciples were trained by him personally for a period of time. They were then to go out and do the same thing. Discipling is not just making them aware of information. It's a process of intimate relationship, of working with someone to get them from where they are to where they need to be to go out and do the job that they're being trained for. Okay, this is a big deal. And we have not seen discipleship being done on this planet in a very long time. Got a lot of ministries out there think they're doing it, claim they're doing it, but I don't think it looks like what we see here in Scripture. Not the ones I've seen. Now, maybe I haven't seen everything, so maybe there's something out there I don't know about. But we want to start to bring that back if we can. But the problem is that to really do it right, you have to live in the same place, be available to each other in the same location, and do it in a whole more intense way than we can do virtually through the cameras and the internet and everything else. And you have to be willing. Here's the hard part. You, the one who's being discipled, have to be able to fully put your life in that leader's hand. That's hard. There's no arguing in discipleship. If you don't have that love and trust and respect for that leader, to know that that's the one that Yahweh has put there to do this, you really are not ready for discipleship, or you haven't found the right person. Because a lot of you think that it's like going to school where you can take what you want and leave what you don't want and just ignore what you want to ignore and do what you want to do. That's not discipleship. It's a whole different relationship that most of us are not really ready for, even though we claim we want it. We're going to do a lot more teachings about discipleship as well, okay? But that's what's hopefully coming as we get this building set and we can do more things. All right, so this is the afterburn. After the teaching, if you have any comments or questions, you can raise your hand. Frederick, you want to grab a mic and bring it around? Okay, we got a few hands up. If you're on the live stream, we got Kurt and Robert on the live stream. Okay, so the mic's coming on. We'll begin with Shira.
This is really great, bringing us into Joshua and Judges. Thank you so much. I have a question. The paradigm for Israel in Deuteronomy 28, and you have said this several times, the Deuteronomy 28 promises are for corporate Israel living in covenant. And of course, we know that we've already gotten the promises that involve curses. So here we are, very ignorant and trying to come back, being part of the Ezekiel 37 promise, trying to be drawn back, to a place. So in coming out of our curse of blindness, what would you say about, is he relating to us then as a body, or is it more individually? And what would you say about his mercy toward us in areas where we still are untaught and ignorant?
I don't think that we could, even as a group, like a congregation, think of ourselves necessarily yet as a corporate body, although in some small ways we're getting in those directions. But as far as individually, I think I say this every time during our prayer time, which is that he gives us the miracles and the interventions just enough to remind us that he's there and that he cares. Just like when Yeshua went from town to town, I mean, he didn't fix every problem they all had, but he did some signs and wonders. He did a few things to tell people, this is going on, I'm here. God, the Father's there. There's a signs to give us encouragement and hope, and that's what draws us to believe all the rest of the book. But we're not, as a corporate group, going to be experiencing the promises of the blessings of Deuteronomy 28, which were national in nature.
I understand that
Right.
part, but what, as far as the disobedience, as far as the curses, I mean, I've found that.
Well, not all of the curses are individual either. A lot of them are corporate. They want, us being chased by enemies and everything else. But the struggles that we have in all the different areas of our finances, relationships, and our health and other things that he mentioned there, a lot of us are individually dealing with, are part of living in an area of cursing. Plus, remember that a lot of it is just man's creating its own problems by its self-sovereignty, and so we're living in that part of the relationship is that we're living within the self-sovereign man area. We're not in a corporately covenanted area, that place that was protected on the hill, so to speak.
So would you say that when things fall upon us, that it's upon each of us to search out why?
Well, yes, and that's where you can also counsel about it. But realize that some of the things that are happening to us now in the dispersion are time and chance. Some of the things that are happening to us are because it's just we're living in a society, in a world that does, in general, is not covenanted. Okay, so it's bringing upon itself a bunch of stuff. And so it could be that he's trying to get your attention personally and individually. That takes prayer and counsel. And that's why a lot of people that have contacted me, sometimes I'll have to say to them, look, don't overthink this and respond in sort of that way that you were trained in Christianity to respond that everything is sort of directly connected, where instead realize some things are just time and chance and are not directly connected, where you don't have to think, well, I must have done something wrong. Well, no, bad things can still happen to you even if you're not doing anything wrong. We're living in a place where that happens. We're not living in a protected space. Okay? So I would be very reluctant to jump to the conclusion as to why without prayer and counsel, just to be sure, because, I have had many people, especially coming out of Christianity, that as soon as something happens, they're very quick to say, oh, well, what did you do wrong? Or why? You must have been sinning or something. Well, not necessarily. Sometimes stuff just happens. I mean, Solomon tells us that. Especially when we're in a world that's not obedient, a lot of stuff happens. A lot of stuff happens to quote unquote good people. And so there's no direct correlation. Let me rephrase that. There is not a direct correlation necessarily to everything that goes bad, quote unquote, to doing something of sin yourself. Could be societal sin that's going on is allowing bad things to happen all over the place, and you may get, what's called like collateral damage. Like those people today that were in the synagogue that got shot. Now, why did they get shot and others not? Time and chance is my opinion. I don't think it was that they did anything in particular. We live in a dangerous world that's not Torah obedient, that's not covenanted, and so bad things generally tend to happen randomly all over the place.
Thank you. Just one more comment. In chapter 1 of Judges, I was making the connection how the tribal leaders, they failed to drive out the idolatrous peoples who were around them. And today, when we fail to fully come out of Babylon, we don't expel all the known transgression, we also become ensnared. And I just saw that connection with having to drive out, really be determined to leave that system and to receive instruction from leadership to just get rid of it. And I appreciate that you continually, the carrot and the stick. It's all there.
Amen.
So thank you.
Amen. Listen, there's a lot of people in your life that are useful, I guess, and helpful and encouraging and everything else, but there's also several or a lot of people can be in your life that you need to get them out of your life. Whether it's because of Torah observance and those spiritual things, or it could just be because they're just negative people. I mean, you may have people that are just bringing you down all the time and whatever it is, and you don't need that in your life. You're going to have to examine those in your life that are not a positive part of your moving forward. and not necessarily cut them out, but maybe at least minimize and limit their influence and your interaction with them. Because you have to remember that there is no argument about this fact. You are the sum total of your inputs. Who you hang out with, what you read, what you eat, what you listen to, what you watch, these are your inputs. So who you spend time with, some of you have seen this with your children, and you could even remember this when you were a child. You tended to become a lot more like the people you were hanging around. And then different groups of people you hung around with, you tended to behave a little bit differently. And sometimes people would notice that you change and you behaved a little bit differently when you were around different people, because you are susceptible to the influences of other people in a high way. All right, so let's be aware that you may need to start creating some distance with your interaction with some people. I'm not trying to isolate you from the world. Even Yeshua said, I'm not trying to get you guys out of the world, but that you would not be of the world. So you need to then control the level of interaction you have. And I'm not telling you that I know who those people are in your life. You need to know who those people are in your life that are creating that negative influence in your life, that are not a positive to your forward movement in changing from who you are to who he is. Amen? Okay? And that's hard because you may have really strong emotional attachments to some of the ones. Maybe your strongest emotional attachments are the ones that are least valuable in your life as far as forward movement, the most actually negatively influencing. That tends to be the problem, is we tend to be so attached emotionally to the ones that we probably should be disconnecting from more than anybody else. And so be aware of that. Are you being blinded by your emotion to people that are just not helpful to where you're trying to go? Dawn.
I think you might have already answered my question, but...
Okay, next question.
No, I want to wait. You were talking about being careful to not give authority over us and who we give authority to and having that influence on us. How does that apply to, for instance, the military, giving them authority over you, and our jobs and our employers? We have to give them respect and obey that authority to a point, but is it just a matter of obeying Torah and not going beyond that? How do we balance giving our employers authority and keeping authority with Yahweh, being in the world, being a light to the world, but not being of the world? Is that just an individual thing, like people that are in the military? How does that function?
All right, so remember at the beginning of this teaching, we talked about there being covenants between human beings as opposed to just being one. See, the covenant idea of covenant is not just between us and Yahweh. You can make a covenant with me. You have a covenant with your husband. Your husband and I can have a covenant. If I'm an employer and you're my employee, we have a covenant. We have a contract. It's just a fancy word for contract to some degree. Okay? So whatever you contracted with your employer, you need to keep and submit to that contract. You just got to be careful you don't make a contract that conflicts with the big contract, which is the covenant with Yahweh. So if you know that your employer is going to expect you to work on Sabbath and on holy days, well, then you shouldn't make that contract. Because if you do make that contract, you should be adhering to the contract you made with your boss. Okay, if you knew in advance that that was part of the contract. Okay, because you now chose to be in a contract. Now, if you made a contract with your boss and your boss did not involve those things in the contract, and then all of a sudden he wants to impose them, then you can now choose to decide you no longer want to be in that contract because that contract wasn't what you originally agreed to. So then you would make a choice to change that contract, to break contract, or to make a new one with the employer saying, well, listen, that doesn't really work for me, but if you want me to still work here, let's make a new contract that says I don't have to do these things because otherwise I'm going to have to go find other employment. Because the contract you hired me under did not require me to do that. Military, you have to understand, in the military, you're contracting and knowing what the contract is. You're going to have to do pretty much whatever they say, when they say it, how they say it, and you have very little authority over yourself. That's the contract you're signing. How do we balance that? Well, you have to understand that this is where we then deal with necessary services. Okay, so in necessary services, somebody needs to be guarding the wall every day. Somebody needs to be available in case someone gets injured every day. Somebody has to be available in case there's a crime thing happening to help prevent that every day. These are what I call critical or necessary services. Now, don't go ahead and spin that whatever you're doing because you think it's necessary is a necessary service. They are limited to those things that are life and death issues. That would be police, fire, hospital, okay? Not family doctor necessarily, because family doctors can choose to work whenever they want to work necessarily. We're talking about the emergency people, EMTs, okay, the guys who run in the ambulance, all those guys that are necessary when things happen in an emergency or that are necessary to keep you safe. The military, the police, to keep you safe. We don't have any reason to believe that all of a sudden, just because it's Shabbat, nobody's going to do anything. We just had the shooting up in Pennsylvania, and it was Shabbat. And the police all showed up. Good thing they were on duty. Both my children ended up in the hospital when they were little babies on Friday nights. Why that happened on Friday nights? It just, they both got injured. They fell in the house, hurt themselves, and ended up in the hospital to get some stitches on a Friday night. I'm glad somebody was there when I went there to take them and handle it and stitch them up and what needed to be done. It was an emergency. So, but you have to know when you're covenanting or contracting to go into those careers that what you're doing is coming under a contract that is going to have you having a whole lot of choice of your own. Now, there's ways that I think make sense in my mind to handle it. It's just in my mind. That's why I didn't say there's a verse that I can refer to for this. But I think that if you're going to choose to be doing necessary emergency services, that you should be doing it not because it pays well, but because that's where your heart is. And if it's where your heart is, then I would say you should not get paid for breaking Sabbath or breaking holy days, but take the money they pay you and put it in the box, in the offering box, so that you're not benefiting from breaking the Sabbath. What you're doing is your heart is there to serve the needs of people in emergencies. Hopefully that makes some sense. And that way, I think it also helps the people's conscience too, to say, you know what, my heart is to help people, but my heart is also to keep Torah. So, well, you know what, then don't benefit from it. See, if you show up to do your job and you're getting no benefit but helping people, then your heart's right. See, so getting paid is not part of the issue. That's just something that I felt the Ruach led me to, and whether that's right or wrong, that came right from wherever I got it from, okay? It's not a scriptural mandate. But some of you may feel like that makes sense and it works, and I think that it does for a lot of people. But you know what? Choose your careers carefully, knowing the level of frustration you might have wanting to be Torah observant in a place that you can't. Okay, if you work in the ER, somebody's got to be there Friday night and Saturday. If you're a policeman, somebody's got to be on duty on Saturday and Friday night. If you're in fire department, same thing. If you're, working in the hospital in the ER and that kind of stuff, somebody's got to be there watching even if you're just in a hospital watching those patients that are on 24-hour critical care, somebody's got to be in there making sure that they're not, going into some sort of a trauma, because they need to be watched and maintained all the time. Now, don't you choose to decide, well, people need to do this, and I have that job, and it's important, and counsel about it. Because I've had people talk to me and claim their job was in that area, and I didn't think so. Now, just because I don't think so doesn't mean I'm right, they're wrong, but I would get counsel about it. All right, Leanne?
Will you help reconcile the difference or the contrast between Joshua 23:14 about marrying outside of the covenant and what we see in 1 Corinthians 7:14 about the unbelieving spouse being sanctified by the believing spouse? And I guess specifically my question is, in 1 Corinthians 7:14, is that only dealing with children resulting from that marriage, or does it also apply to possibly marriages later in life that don't involve children?
Okay, well, Paul's trying to deal with an issue, again, like we have today, because, right, Paul's dealing with, until we get to this sort of Peter and Paul going and dealing with Gentiles, you don't have this problem, really, except when nations, like in Joshua's day, would interact with other nations. What you have happening in Paul's day is that people were coming into observance and covenant wherever they already were in life, and some of them were already married. So I think I covered that already, but I'll say it again just to kind of contrast. There's the instruction not to go and purposely put yourself into that problem versus dealing with you already being there. So Paul's dealing with it just like we are today. Some of the people that come into covenant are already married and their spouses are not seeing what they're seeing. And so his instruction is for those of you that are in those relationships, and it has to do with, look, as long as they're willing to live with you and they're not actively causing you a nightmare and other problems, that you should live at peace and do what you can, and know that there's a certain sanctifying for the children because of that. Okay, so your question about it being about the children is really what the key is, what Paul's trying to talk about here. But he's dealing with the same idea that I was talking about earlier, which is these people, when they come in, may already be married. He's not saying that anything different about the idea that you should not be getting married to someone who's outside the covenant. That already is clear in 1 Corinthians when he talks about, 2 Corinthians when he talks about not being unequally yoked. Okay? So he's encouraging you not to choose to put yourself in that position. However, a lot of the people today and then come in already in that position. We've got a bunch of them here in the congregation. We've got a bunch of them out there watching on live stream who are coming into this where for whatever reason, and I really wish I could understand why, but he's called people and not their spouses. Now, sometimes he calls the spouse just a little bit delayed. I've seen that happen a lot of times where the one spouse kind of gets it, and within a couple of years, the other one gets it too, and that's wonderful. Doesn't always work that way. I've got a few people in here who have been married a very long time, and their spouses still are on the other side of the coin. Yet, their spouses have also seen fit to live in peace and allow them the space to do what they need to do. That's not ideal, but it's better than having strife or divorce. And so, hopefully that makes sense. Paul's trying to explain it using his own language to say, look, don't be so worried about the children. The children, by the way, are still going to have to make their own choices anyway. So once they get to be adults, no longer children, they're going to have to make their own choices. Okay. Next question. Nate?
Referring back to the...
You got to keep it, right?
Back to the employment on Shabbat, before I moved down here, I made it very clear to my employers that Shabbats are off. You can't touch my Shabbats or his Shabbats. And you can't touch the feasts. But I did let them know, look, if you have a pinch point in the ER on Shabbat, you can call me in for emergencies. There's enough people who do not recognize the Shabbat that they can work it. But if it gets in a pinch and you need me, give me a call.
Right.
No problems there.
See, now remember, hold on, just to interrupt. So he made a contract when he went to employ that things were certainly in the contract. In other words, if they were to change this on him later, he said, oh no, when we started, we had an agreement, a contract, a covenant, that my Shabbats were off limits. Even though I did tell you I could in a pinch, but that's a pinch as opposed to expecting me here every week or 2 times a month on a regular basis or whatever they expect in hospitals based on rotations. He has a contract. So if you can work that out with your employers, do that, okay? So I'm not saying just because you're in emergency services, you have to work on Shabbats. See if you can get them to say, because they wanted him bad enough, his qualifications and their need for his position, they were willing to give him what he asked for. So it certainly doesn't hurt to ask. So thank you for bringing that up. Go ahead.
And I did tell them I could come in on Saturday night Saturday nights. So it's only like an hour that, even during the summer, that I show up on Shabbat, but I was willing to give him that a little bit.
Right. But remember, again, he's working in the ER. If there's anything that qualifies as necessary emergency services, that's it. I mean, he's in the emergency room handling things that are urgent enough to show up at the emergency room on a Saturday. Go ahead.
I was reflecting out of 2 Corinthians. Before coming to Torah, I was covenanted to the world and its beliefs. At one point, there came an understanding of what the truth was. And not everything was apparent at that time, but there was enough evidence for me that the relationship was false that I had in the church or wherever I was. So I had to make at that point I didn't understand the teaching. I loved your teaching about marriage, putting away, and divorce. It's a little different than what the list is, but I made the choice at that point in time to put away what I thought I understood in order to try to find greater understanding of what was the truth. And then eventually I had to make a choice to make a divorce to that covenant or to that relationship I had with my previous life. Would you say that a lot of folks, especially as they're coming into Torah, are still in the phase of putting away and trying to understand the truth enough to come to a place where they divorce it and put it behind them so that they can continue in the truth?
Well, I agree with you. The way I would word it is, excuse me, is that we are dealing with emotional attachments. We're under an emotional bondage. Okay, the putting away and the divorcing ourselves, we're not talking about literally husbands and wives here. We're talking from a relationship with the world or relationships with other people or a way of life, the old you, the old man, so to speak, whatever we're supposed to bury. It's all about getting past the emotional connection. We are comfortable with our emotional connection. It's what we've known. The unknown is scary. The unknown is awkward and uncomfortable. It's something we generally try to avoid in our lives. We like the comforts of the known. This is why even when we have a congregation or a meeting, that people will tend to sit almost in the exact same place every week because it becomes that known, comfortable space. We like routine. We like things that we can know and expect, and we know what's going to happen. And so to divorce yourself or put away that stuff which was most comfortable and most known to you is very, very uncomfortable, which is why we try to straddle that by developing new comforts while still having the old one. And that only creates confusion and issues. Very hard, which is why he said to Abram, get up and go. He didn't work with Abram where he was. He took him out of it completely and said, now I can work with you. And so that's scary. That's not easy to do. But it's an emotional thing. We have to start dealing with our emotional attachments to people, to ideas, to relationships, to everything. Okay, that's where we get in. That's why it's about the heart. And you shall love him with everything, and that means that we have to love everything else less. But we still already love a lot of things a lot. And that emotion is our stumbling block.
Also, you had mentioned about watching these
get it right up by your mouth. Don't be
these
shy.
Leaders. Sorry, I gotta get used to this again. Get these leaders or teachers that are teaching opposite of covenant, and we've made the effort to teach our children don't even entertain the opposite sex if they're not in covenant. Don't even. I mean, it's okay to be nice with them, but don't even entertain the thought that this is a potential unless they're coming to covenant on their own. And so why would we even entertain when we know that they're not in covenant? Why would we even think to entertain that relationship and encourage that relationship? So I just wanted to encourage that thought process. And the last thing, talking about those that did not have a relationship out of Judges chapter 2. The ones before them broke down their idols and their slaughter places and all that. But then the generation that came after, they did not have a relationship or know Yahweh. Do we see that again during the millennium? We see where those that enter into the millennium have a covenantal relationship with Yahweh. But as time goes on, the adversary is released again. And then we start to see that happen again, where the relationship, the generations start to fall away because they don't have a relationship.
Well, it goes back to what you see when he said, I'm going to send you these different challenges. They're going to test you and try you to see where your heart's at. Because it's really easy for you to kind of keep chugging along when everything's wonderful. But are you going to when things are not so wonderful? That's why Hasatan is released towards the end of the 1,000 years. As a test to see where people are really at. Where's your heart really at? I mean, that's really the problem. And this emotional thing is really the piece of it. That's why the heart of the matter, 64 parts, is that's your big problem right there, is your heart. What are you attached to? Are you letting your emotions drive? Look, excuse me, there are some of you, I'm not thinking of anybody in particular, okay? But there are some of you out there that are still listening to teachers you know you shouldn't be listening to, but you like them. There's people in your life that you're still listening to, but you like them, okay? That's that emotional piece. Because I'll talk to somebody and they'll be saying, well, I was listening to so-and-so and they were saying this, and I'm like, why are you even listening to that person? I don't even understand. You already know that this, and this, and this is what they're teaching that is wrong. You already know that they've, in some cases, done things like name dates and they didn't come true, which is another reason not to listen to them anymore. Whatever the reason is, oh, but I like them. What does liking them have to do with anything? Where does it say, blah, 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 well, but unless you like them, if you like them, then it's okay. See, it's that emotional piece. We have to be really careful about that emotional piece. The only place that the emotional piece comes into anywhere in Scripture is how we feel about Him. That's it. I mean, we're told to love each other, but still that's supposed to be less than we love Him. And so that's our whole simple mandate. Love Him most, everybody else less. But when you start loving those that are in error and start loving those that are not heading in the right direction, guess where you're going to probably end up? Following them. Billie Jean?
First of all, I want to thank you for covering those two books. That's what I've been studying this past couple of weeks. I just thought I might share a little thing with some of you that are maybe a little newer to this. When I came into covenant, I had already married my husband. We had been married for 3 years. And we were both on the same page. Well, when the Father opened my eyes and I came under this, my husband got very upset. He got very angry with me. And he actually come home from work one day and told me that I was going to have to get rid of all of my literature and everything. And so I stayed home from work the next day and I prayed and asked the Yahweh to show me what to do. Well, when my husband came home that night, I went to him and I told him. I said, I'm not the person he married. Yahweh has changed my mind about a lot of things. But I can stay in this marriage with you as long as I can do what Yahweh has called me to do. Otherwise, I said, my things are packed, my books are packed, I have a place to go, and I will leave right now. But I said, and I said, because I know that I'm different from the person that you married. And he said, I don't want you to go. He said, I want you to stay. And that's all it took. That was 20 years ago. He has never, ever said anything to me about what I do. In fact, he even starts to tell people about me and my beliefs and how I keep them. But again, I want to tell you that you have to always be on that page. In other words, I can't go out and eat catfish or something, which I wouldn't want to anyway, but what I'm trying to say is I still have to be that person that I told him I had changed into.
Yeah, you can't blur the line.
Yeah, and he's accepted it, and we've had a very pleasant marriage. I mean, so I just wanted to encourage people that you have to stick to what you say. I mean, you have to be firm when you're telling someone that you've come into this, that you have to be firm with that, and you have to live it. But it will work. It can work out.
I mean, thank you, Billie Jean. Look, let me say this, because Billie Jean makes a really powerful point. She had her stuff packed and ready to go. In other words, what's going to really make the difference is for the other person you're dealing with, whoever it is, whether it's your employer, your spouse, whoever it is, to understand your level of commitment. If they think you're bluffing and then blustering and whatever else, that's not going to impress anybody. but she's not only made her point very clearly the day she made it, but then she's walked it in such a way as to show she's not a hypocrite. Because you start blurring that line, and now the whole point is not believable anymore. Right? She said the same thing with her boss. She said she did the same thing. You have to make that really clear. By the way, what you'll also find is that, and we've seen this with other people, when you show and demonstrate your willingness to lose whatever it is, to leave and lose something, you may actually, that's when the miracles start to come in, when you have to first commit. Okay? We had some people in this group a while back working at a distribution center for like all the big supermarkets, and they were on a shift that had no problem with the Sabbath, and all of a sudden they were getting all these shift changes made, and they just simply said, no problem, I get it, but just so you know, I'm not working that shift. So if you want me to work, let me keep doing my shift. If you don't want me to work, that's fine too, I'll go get another job, but just so you know, I'm not working that shift. And guess what? They found favor to do that. Now, by the way, they got fired soon afterwards because they did other things they shouldn't be doing, and now they were under the microscope. If you're going to stand out and make a point, you better be that exemplary, you know, because they are going to look and watch you more closely. Because if you're inconveniencing them because they're making an allowance for you, you're going to be on a much shorter leash. You understand what I'm saying? But the intervention was given. Yahweh did his part. He provided the ability to not have to work that shift. The person then did some other things they shouldn't have done and ended up getting fired. But you see, Yahweh did the intervention. The person then had the ball in their court. They could have kept going forward fine, but they didn't. So that goes to what Billy's saying exactly. You go ahead and do what you got to do. You show that you're fully committed. By the way, did you notice she also said, I understand and accept the fact that I'm not the person you married, and that's so I don't blame you if there's a problem here. I have changed. So I'm not blaming you. I'm not mad at you. And so if that's not going to work for you, I get it. But I'd like to stay. See, I always talk to married couples when I counsel them, that sometimes the greatest way to get your marriage fixed is to get almost to divorce. In other words, to realize that it really could end. Otherwise, why would you fix it? You know, because there's nothing threatening. I mean, not fix it, but why would you change to fix it? Unless you realize, wait a minute, the person's serious. But I always tell them is that if you want the marriage, say, I am fully committed to leaving, but I would rather stay and work this out. But make sure they understand, but if we don't, know that I am committed to leaving. Sometimes you have to do that. It's not a threat, it's a reality. You say, look, it's not what I want, but if this and this and this doesn't, I mean, we can't keep going this way. Something's got to change. And then sometimes the only way to get that change is to put it right to the edge. Because I'll talk to people who've been living right away from that edge or near enough to it, but not right there, for like 20, 30, 40 years of marriage. And they're so upset and frustrated with each other. I said, well, then go have that divorce conversation and see if that's what you really want. And if not, maybe that'll motivate you to fix it. Because there's no reason to live this life of, quiet desperation, as they say. We're just miserable and together. Better you should be apart or not miserable together. Choose one and work on it. But make your preference clear. I would rather fix this. And maybe you could admit in humility, and I don't have a clue how to do it. Let's go call Rabbi or somebody and get some help. But I always say, don't push to the edge unless you make it clear what your preference is. Don't threaten divorce unless you're also going to make it clear. If that's really what you want, then just go do it. Don't threaten it. If it's not really what you want, say, I really don't want this, but I can't see any other choice if we're not going to actually have something motivate us to change and fix this. And that's kind of what Billy did at the beginning. She said, look, I'm ready to go make this change because I realize this isn't going to work if it's going to stay like this. If you're going to tell me I can't have my literature and I can't do my stuff, this isn't going to work. And her husband said, no, we'll make this work. And he's been good about it ever since, 20 years plus. That's good, okay? That's really good. But I love the part of the testimony that shows she was willing to push it right to the edge, though. Commitment is usually what brings the difference and the change. Rabbi Tom, a couple years back, made a commitment to stop smoking. I know a lot of people have stopped smoking, but you know what? I also know a lot of people that try and they never get there. You know why? Because they're trying. Stop trying. Do. I hate to sound like Yoda. There is no try, only do.
Can you type to him and tell him
You know?
something for the live stream?
I do the voice, but it'll hurt my throat.
Because I'm not doing work.
There's only do. It's a commitment. And so make a commitment to fix things. Don't try to fix things. Make a commitment to do it. But also make a commitment that either we're going to do it or we're going to end it. It can't be this torture in the middle. Doesn't do good for anybody. It's not good for the children. It's not good for anything. My preference, and everybody's preference, should be to fix it. Okay? But sometimes you have to get to the edge and say, look, this has got to fix. And the only way to fix it is either fix it or end it. Which one do you want to do? I want to fix it. But realize I'm committed. I'm willing to go the other way too. But I'm not willing to do this forever. I'm not willing to continue in this awful limbo that we're in. It's that vomit thing where the hot and or cold, but all that kind of stuff. That lukewarm, useless thing. And so that way, at least you can move forward. All right, I don't know if you're going to like that as good counseling or bad counseling. I'm not encouraging anybody to get divorced, but you know what? You might need to push it to that point to fix something. Because then at some point you might realize, you know what, but I don't want to lose this. I know it's not working. Let's fix it. Then you got to admit the second point, which is, and I have no idea how to do it. So then you got to get help. Both of you. All right, who's next? Okay, live stream.
All right, from Nick Goddard. Does the good king, bad king, obedience, disobedience pattern of Israel in Judges give a type shadow of the Messianic body since the first century? Thinking of what Rav Shaul said about discipleship.
I don't know what you're talking about from the point of view of that I don't see a pattern of that happening in the Messianic body necessarily. Good leadership, bad leadership, good leadership, like that. I don't see that. Then again, I'm not well versed in the early assembly and some of the things that happened years into that. But you see it in the kings and judges. You start seeing that the judges coming in. There was a good leader, there's a bad leader, good leader, bad leader. You see that also going through all the kings once they start having kings. Good king, bad king, good king, bad king. But I don't know, in the body, I think there's mostly been no leadership. Poor leadership and no leadership for a very long time. So, I don't know if there was a pattern in the early assembly, the early Kihila, but now in most of the last 2,000 years, there's been no leadership, no structure, and that's been really the problem. Okay, what else you got?
From Melody Fisher, talking about people you may need to remove from your life. What if they are a parent, since we are also to honor our parents?
Okay, so there's a difference between obeying parents. There's a difference between having good, deep relationship with parents and dishonoring them. Okay, we're trying not to shame them, publicly ridicule them, mock them in any way, be disrespectful with language we may use in talking to them. Okay, but if you have a parent that is disrespectful to you and your children and the way you're running your family and all these other ways that parents can be disrespectful, you may need to tell them, Mom, I love you, Dad, I love you, whoever it is, but if you continue behaving like this, you will not have access. That's not disrespecting and dishonoring. That's reaping what they sow. Now, you can do that in a very dishonoring way. You can be mean and ugly and use language you shouldn't and call them names and everything else, or you can simply say, this isn't working, it's not acceptable, and if you continue, I will cut you off from me and the children. Because a lot of times it's the grandparents with the children not honoring what the parents want done or not done with the children. Like you leave your kids with your parents, and then all of a sudden they're sticking pork in their mouth and everything else. And if they cross lines, that doesn't break the fifth commandment to tell them you got to relate to these lines, or you are not going to have a relationship. Okay, that's not a problem. But you do it respectfully. Okay, you can respectfully tell them if you behave this way, you're cut off. Cutting them off is not disrespectful. How you do it can be disrespectful. And you give them the choice, and you say, look, this is because of your choice. You can make different choices, you'll have access. That's a big problem, by the way, with parents, when you're full grown adults with your own children and you're dealing with your parents. The fifth commandment, we'll talk more about that at a point when I'm going to do a teaching on honor and shame and stuff, and we'll deal with the fifth commandment. The fifth commandment does not require you to do anything your parents tell you to do when you're an adult. It requires you to treat them respectfully and not dishonoring or shaming them. But with all due respect, Mom, if you're going to behave this way towards my children and not respect my authority, we're going to have to cut you off. There's a way to say that. Go ahead, Nate.
I just wanted to comment on leadership and where we were. I know I've mentioned this a lot, and I've had people ask me, well, why would you trust the leadership? Why would you put your faith in there? And I just tell them, look, first I did my vetting, and then secondly, my faith is not in my teacher. I trust my teacher. I know that he has the anointing and the authority and the appointing of his position, not because he told me, but because I have watched it. And for those that got their feet on either side about leadership, my faith is not in my teacher. My faith is in Yahweh. So if I found an anointed appointed, I put my trust in that anointed appointed in order to do what he says when he says it, how to do it, trusting that he is being led by our Father to govern over me.
Amen.
And if there's an issue, my issue is not with him. I need to bring it before Yahweh and let him deal with the anointed appointed. Then my faith is complete because it's not in him, it's trusting Yahweh over the trust that I have in my teacher. And then the second thing was, because we I've put myself in a position to trust my teacher with faith in Yahweh, that my wife and I have come to a place where we trust his counsel with faith in Yahweh to work through him in that counsel to bring us to a place where we were almost in a place of divorce. We went to that edge about 2.5 years ago. And I was very thankful for that teaching about divorce, remarriage, and putting away, because before then, we were always taught that was Yahweh hated divorce. Now we're married because we choose to be married and we choose to work it out. We're not under some kind of fear that Yahweh is going to destroy us because we made a decision to go to that edge. But we didn't want a divorce. We wanted help to get, because we love each other, we wanted help to get to where we know Yahweh wanted us to go. So submitting to that leadership in faith in Yahweh has brought tremendous blessing, not only for me and my wife, but I believe also for my children. I think my kids can say the same, but I'll let them speak for themselves. So with that, I thank our Father first, and I thank you, Rabbi, for stepping out in there in that limelight and that spot being on you all the time. So thank you.
Amen. Let me add one important piece to this. What he didn't mention was that I said to him and his wife, I said, look, the way this works is that you take an opportunity to test it, to taste of it. So I said, let's try this. As skeptical as you are, let's try this for 6 months or a year. I think I asked him for a year. I said, give me a year. 6 months, I said, if you're not willing to, right? So 6 months it was, okay? And so that's the step, because some people might ask you, like, well, how do you trust him, or why would you do this? And you say, well, I vetted, I did this. But more importantly is because he was willing to try it. Even as skeptical and cautious and all of that, but that's the only way you're really going to know, is you have to give it a try. And so that's what I asked of them, and that's what I would ask of you the same way, is that, when you're dealing with a leader, the only way you're going to know if that leader is what there needs to be for you in your life is you have to taste of it. You have to go to them in an open way of asking for counsel, willing to try it and see what happens. I mean, that's one of the things that you have to be willing to do. And so he didn't mention that, but I wanted to mention it because that's that other missing piece is that because I knew how skeptical they were. Actually, they were aggressively against it. It was more than skeptical. And yet I said, well, how about this? What would it cost you if you really want this to maybe work with your wife? What would it cost you to try this for a year or 6 months? Is it that really? I mean, you can always get a divorce in 6 months. Why don't you just try this first? But if you're going to try it, let's try it. Let's do it. Blinders on. Let's just do it and see what happens. Well, that's the only way you're going to know. All right, thank you really for that testimony. It's really good. And I do encourage you to talk to Dawn and Nate because they're very happy to share with you so that you could understand. Because these are people, I promise you, that the first words I got out of their mouths when I said hello was, what you're selling, we ain't buying. That was literally what they said. Hey, thanks, but no thanks. I said, okay, go have a nice lunch. We were in between after services, headed to lunch, and they were just like, I was like, okay. Now, they'll tell you, I didn't push it, didn't argue. I just said, okay, have a nice day. Sarah Beth.
And it's a question that I got from live stream question. The whole pattern, good judge, bad judge, and good king, bad king, are we doomed to that as just people? We always repeat that pattern?
No, I mean, I think that the problem was they were trusting in a man that was the king and that kind of thing instead of making their own choices and focusing on Yahweh. Like Nate said, he doesn't have his relationship with me because he sees just me. He sees what Yahweh's doing through me, and that's what moves his decision-making and choices. And so the people would have to see Yah working through that king, like as in a David HaMelech, David the king, or someone like Hezekiah, as opposed to some of the other kings that were not so good. See, the problem wasn't just that they had a bad king. The problem was that the people flourished in their evil doing under the bad king. The people still could have made choices not to do those things. But the point Yahweh's making is that when the king imposed his strength of power and will, the people behaved well. When he didn't impose it, they didn't. And showing that the people were weak. They were only doing what they needed to do when they were supposed to because someone made them do it. Their heart was not in it. Okay? So are we doomed to that pattern? Yes, we are, and as long as we are not going to take responsibility for ourselves. Taking responsibility for yourself is not the same as saying, well, I'm just taught by the Ruach. No, it means take responsible for yourself and then go find those anointed appointeds in the fivefold, etc., and get under that in a submissive way so that you can flourish. And get your heart right so you're not just finding somebody to tell you what to do and just to be there as again, letting someone else make choices for you. And by the way, people have done that and called me and wanted me to make their choices for them. They get real frustrated when I won't. Because I won't. Because you have to make your decisions. I can guide you, though, and give you some of the information to help you maybe make better choices, and give you counsel. But I'm not going to make your choices for you because that undermines everything I've said for 20 years as well as what I've taught you the book says. There was your example today. In history, you see that with Joshua and going into Judges, that the people, when it was imposed on them, they did fine. When it wasn't, they didn't because they were not actually the ones who were interested in doing it. They were being forced to. That doesn't benefit anything. You will not do well sitting on Judgment Day and Yahweh says, well, I noticed you kept the Sabbath every week. That's really good. But I also noticed you only did it because so made you do it. See, that's not going to score any points for you whatsoever. If you only did it because somebody made you do it, Abba's not impressed. He wants it to be a heart choice. That's the Deuteronomy 8:2, whether it's in your heart to do it. That's why that verse always comes back to me as like one of the most pivotal verses in Scripture. Are we getting our hearts to the place where we want to do what's right in His eyes? Amen. Okay, anybody else? All right, let's close up. Shabbat Shalom! Shavua Tov! Hi, Brianna and Stephen.
Happy anniversary.
Amen.